This is the Forbes Books Podcast, conversations with amazing humans who are impacting the world of business and beyond. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and I'm so excited to speak today with one of the most powerful and influential women in entertainment. Her name is Bonnie Hammer, the Vice Chair of NBCUniversal. She's been called the Queen of Cable and has forged a legendary career transforming every facet of the television biz in the male-dominated industry. Bonnie's also known for her candor, mentorship of women, and reputation for predicting television's future. She now shares her hard-earned wisdom for professional success in her new book, 15 Lies Women Are Told at Work, and the Truth We Need to Succeed. Bonnie, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here. It's fun talking to you.
Well, it's an honor to have you on because you've had such an amazing career, and I was very fortunate. I worked in radio in New York for 20 years, and I felt really fortunate. But the fact that you've survived in television for 30 years, have they built a statue for you? Is there a plaque of you somewhere? How the hell did you do that?
No statues, no plaques, no platforms, and sometimes I marvel myself that I've survived it for 30. If I'm going to be really honest, I probably started more like 5 decades ago. But I'm only 30.
Of course.
But I'm only 35.
You started young, Bonnie. But so tell me about that longevity. Before we get into the book, your career, I mean, could you pinpoint the longevity? Because I think that's the one piece that most people going into any kind of media is, there's probably a lot of fits and starts. You're moving around a lot, but you've had a pretty consistent career sort of in the same, not job per se, but in the same field for such a long time. Can you pinpoint it to anything?
First of all, I've been very lucky. And the stars, whatever, have been in alignment. And I've had some amazing bosses, amazing mentors, amazing teams. And I think it's really those people around me who've supported me that have made me shine brighter than probably I should have to begin with. And actually, if I look back, I've been under one umbrella, connected some way, somehow to USA or Sci-Fi for 35 years just in one space, if you will. But during that time, there have been 7 different corporate takeovers. So even though I didn't move, there's zigzagging and other things that happened to me by the changes of buyers and sellers and bosses, etc. It's been an interesting journey, still going, thank goodness. And I feel very, very fortunate. Very lucky, very fortunate, and have learned so much from so many people, and now trying and hoping to pay it forward a little bit.
That's awesome. And if you don't mind nerding out on television for a minute, because I'm a Generation Xer, and I like to say that Gen X is the coolest generation because we've seen this technological shift in our own lifetime. So I am old enough to remember the 3-channel universe, and then all of a sudden, there's a man in our neighborhood installing boxes in everyone's houses, and now you're getting 50 channels, and then all of a sudden it's 100, and then 200, and now thousands of channels. And then we saw the jump to streaming. And I want to talk about cable television in that sort of scope. From what I've learned, I'm a geek about television history and media history, is that the cable model was probably the perfect model for the TV industry because it was the only way that companies could get paid without you having to watch that channel, which is like and antithetical to everything else we know in media. Like, to get paid, you have to have eyeballs. But somehow the powers that be who created cable television built this model where your cable channel gets put on a system, it sits there, people can't, there's no a la carte, you're stuck with that A&E channel or cooking channel or ESPN, regardless whether you want it or not. And those cable companies get paid and then are able to sell advertising on top of it. So tell me about the cable model, not what it's like now, because I know now it's a little crazier, but in terms of what you've seen in the world of cable.
Cable is really interesting. I mean, if you really go back even before my time, so that has to be a long time ago, the root of the cable story actually happened in rural Pennsylvania when literally a rural person wanted access to the 3 channels that you could get in Philadelphia, but you couldn't get in this rural part of Pennsylvania. Besides the distance of about 65 miles, there was also a huge mountain in the way, so there was no way to get any kind of vibe or any connection whatsoever. He literally built an antenna with some investors on top of a mountain and used cables to connect the antenna to get the feeds all the way from Philadelphia. And that's really how it started. So I feel oddly connected because Comcast has been my latest owner for the past, 13, 14 years in Philadelphia. But cable is very interesting because when I actually got involved years later, it was like the wild, wild west. And there were no rules. We would make up rules. We would break the rules. We would try it again. We were the stepchild of the industry. Broadcast was broadcast, and we were trying to compete. And we really couldn't compete in terms of just by pure numbers. But eventually the creativity, the people it attracted, because broadcast at that time was so male-centric, getting in or navigating our way through was virtually impossible. So many of us ended in cable by default, but we learned so much because we wore so many different hats, and we were able to play in a world that gave us such great experience. We could help pretty much do what we wanted creatively because nobody was watching, nobody cared. And what was remarkable about cable is eventually it became so profitable. It absolutely outdid broadcast because we had two streams of revenues. We had the advertiser revenue, which broadcast had, but we had the subscriptions, and the two together made us wildly successful. When I take a look at what USA Network made at its height, it doubled what NBC Broadcast was making at the time. And it was a ridiculous amount of profit against what we spent because, again, cablers were cheap. We could only spend yay much on a series. Broadcast could spend twice or three times as much as an episode per series. So we learned how to do things in a very controlled way, but then made tons of money. It was just pure fun.
And now, unfortunately, you're paying the repercussions of the streaming wars and the fact that people are no longer signing up to these cable systems bundles where you were locked in to watch all these channels where, like you mentioned, you were making two streams of revenue, and now that revenue of the subscribers is going down, and that obviously will then impact the advertising dollars that come down. So if you were to put your crystal ball in terms of where cable television is going, because right now it seems like the incarnation that I grew up with will not be around for much longer. You just can't sustain that model. But where do you see that going?
Joe, if I had the answer, dollars would be pouring through these streaming windows right now. But I think people believe that the world of linear television as we know it is going to totally go away. I don't buy it. Just like everything else, there's been change. And I think what will happen is that we will figure out a way to use all of the different platforms together, that it'll be all about what great content is and where it's going to live and how that distribution will happen from platform to platform to platform. I also kind of believe that the cablers, those who created the box, will also now figure out a way to wrap themselves around multiple streamers, that we will be looking at paying a single subscription for God knows how many streamers, just like we had 100 channels with one cable service and one fee. So who gets there the first? I don't know. But I do believe that the people in power in cable, like the Brian Roberts of the world, will figure out a way to bundle streaming, just like they bundled all of the channels years back. But I don't think there's only going to be one way of viewing. When we talk about film, I think the theater's not going away. I don't believe it's only going to be streaming. I don't think the network's going to disappear completely. I think it'll be some wonderful flow from one to the next that can bring enough money in so they can all exist. Again, it's all about great content. If you don't have great content, it's not going to matter.
Yeah, and it's funny because, like I mentioned, I come from radio. I believe that television is kind of going to go down the similar path. So the radio station I worked at in New York, WDPLJ, was owned by Capital Cities ABC and then by Disney.
Was it 95.5? What was
it? That's it. Yep, Sky Todd in the morning. That's where I worked. And the what I noticed was that in the 90s, radio was no longer the quote unquote growth industry. It was, you could make money, but you couldn't grow. And that's what everything Wall Street cares about is growth. And I almost see that happening in television, where the major conglomerates will not want to be involved in cable or sort of linear television because there's no growth. So a perfect example is one of your competitors, Paramount. Paramount could probably sell tomorrow, but nobody wants their television. So I feel like what's going to happen is you're going to see smaller television network brands, companies, what have you, owning television, and the huge conglomerates kind of staying out of that end. What do you think about my hypothesis there?
Yes and no. I think the Paramount example in some ways accurate. In other ways is, if they're going to look at people who could buy, and obviously Redstone is doing that as we speak, they can't duplicate. They can't have two news channels. There are regulatory issues. So it's not that they don't necessarily want to bring in and merge different news channels and different channels to work together simultaneously, is that legally and regulatory issues, they can't. All of the major players want to figure out how to merge different pieces of their companies for both distribution, for money, and frankly, in order to streamline everyday capabilities. So it's not that television will go away as we know it. Again, it has to be structured in a way that it's affordable, that because the advertisers aren't bringing in that much money, and, the subscriptions for cable are going down, if not away, and we're paying ridiculous amounts of money for every single streaming service. It's how do we merge those entities into fewer players, but bigger players? And how do they make financial sense out of it? And really, it's the bottom line. Finance is business. I wish it were all content and creativity, but it's business. How do we function? How do we make more money than we lose?
Awesome. Well, thank you for indulging me with that. I know we want to get into the book and everything like that, but I like nerding out with folks like you, so I appreciate it. It's 15 Lies Women Are Told at Work. And just so you know, I met my wife at work. She came up working in marketing and radio in the 80s and 90s. And I'm fully aware of what you must have gone through, because my wife tells me that in a room of 50 people, it was 49 men and one woman. And she was always that woman. And she's been through all of the Me Too stories you hear about. She's been there, done that. She survived, and I'm sure you have many stories to tell as well. So I'm very sympathetic to the plight of women in an industry that's driven by men mostly in the past. I know there's been a seismic shift over the last 5 years, but can you describe, and I hate to say it like this, but it's the only way to get into the subject matter of what is it like to be a woman in your industry? Was it that much harder for you to succeed because of your womanness? How did you internalize it or externalize it? And how did that experience shape you?
First and foremost, I was lucky. I had some amazing mentors, which I talk a lot about in the book, who helped me navigate my way. But I also think that, way back when I started, there were no HR departments. It was a very male-driven world. The only way to really navigate through was not to take everything so seriously, to be able to have a sense of humor, let things roll down your back, call people on their BS, and let them go back into their office, feel kind of yucky, and then you just move on. These days, navigating the world is very, very different. And there are rules, there are good HR departments, there are different tacks you can take to kind of grow and navigate your way through corporate America at large. And what I hope with this book is to help people in general, but specifically women, to understand how to navigate, what they need to do, what cliches they've been brought up with, which are just, excuse my French, but bullshit, and how to flip the script on those cliches so they can really succeed and move forward. From the time we are young and at every single rung of the professional ladder, we're fed these cliches, these mantras that if we really follow, are self-sabotage. So my goal is, while still working, I basically can mentor people women as well as guys on a daily basis, or they can call me. I can help them specifically navigate issues. What I hope is this book will be kind of a pocket mentor, if you will, to help people navigate, because it's very specific. It gives no nonsense advice and is very honest and kind of funny too, because I'm pretty self-deprecating in it. And, when I failed, when I screwed something up, to not do it the way I did it, but here are ways that you should handle a situation.
That's great. And so as a mentor, so I hate to keep bringing up my wife, but I always feel like I've been shaped by three women in my life: my mom, my grandmother, and my wife.
Love that.
So I heard the stories, and like, especially during the Me Too moment, my wife and I spoke about this a lot, it wouldn't be a shock for her to walk into a male colleague's office and have him like drop his pants or be sexually harassed by the boss. In her lifespan, when she was doing that, when she was in the industry, the idea of her complaining to someone, like you said, HR really didn't exist. It wasn't even an option to complain to someone else. But now things have changed. So how does your mentorship lens evolve? Because I'm sure if you were mentoring someone 30 years ago, Bonnie, you probably would have said, hey, listen, it sucks what you have to go through, but we can't really say anything. Whereas now we do have a voice. Can you talk about that a little bit?
The world has changed dramatically. And the book is basically talking to or about #MeToo or anything else right now. It's really about solid advice to navigate through your skill set and through a culture and through being honest and direct with people, how to succeed. I'm a big believer, and you have to believe in yourself, and you have to be aware. You have to be able to read a room, whether it's a small room of Bonnie talking to Joe right now, and what is he interested in, what does he want to do, and what can he get out of this interview, as well as being in a corporate boardroom and looking around that room and really watching and listening, seeing how your agenda or somebody else's agenda is affecting someone, and actually learning while you're watching whether something is going to go your way or not, and then absorb and observe so that you can turn a situation, because you're listening and watching rather than thinking about what you're next going to say, into something positive outside of that room later. How to flip that agenda to help your agenda. How to know when your agenda is simply not going to work, so shut up in that meeting, bring it up privately, quietly, or when to speak, and more importantly, how to speak. How do you use voice? How do you use your words? How do you get a yes in a situation which doesn't look pretty promising, but I'm a big believer you always can.
I love that. That's great. And the title of the book is obviously 15 Lies Women Are Told at Work. Why the word lies? Because, Bonnie, I don't know if you know, we live in a world of alternate truth. So there's no such thing as a lie or truth. Why was that word so important? Because you could have written a book about anything with all the knowledge you have in that brain of yours. But why was it important to sort of hang your shingle on the idea of sharing these lies?
Because I think many people believe what is told to them is the absolute truth. I could use, uncommon sense versus common sense. Things people have been told isn't as graphic as a lie. When you look at how dangerous some of these little dictums are, somebody telling you when you're young, and I had been told this, oh, just fake it till you make it. The truth is, the minute you start faking it, the minute you start lying about something that you can't do when you're telling people you do, basically it's over. The minute somebody finds that you're not telling the truth, that you're not being straight with them, they're going to second guess every other thing you do. So it's a lie. If I fake it, I'm lying about something. I'm pretending to do or know something that I really don't. Instead, it's more important to ask questions, to admit what you don't know, to find somebody who could teach you, because most people really want to help you. It empowers them, oddly. It gets them on your side because they feel bigger and more important because they're helping you grow. So there's so many of them. You can have it all. Bullshit. I don't care what anybody says. The difference between having it all and not having it all is these days what we have are choices. And that choices are ours. We can make it. And the other thing about that is your all and my all, they're not the same. So having it all means nothing. That's also a lie, because all is pretty damn big. And my alls are going to be very different from yours or my best friend or my husband's or my kids. There are just a lot of things out there. Another one that is a huge lie is talk is cheap. It's the most valuable commodity you have. It's a lie to say your words don't matter. To me, lie was important. It's big, it's bold, and it's the truth.
I love that. I love that so much because, Bonnie, I mean, we're like on the same wavelength, because I just wrote a blog about this a couple of weeks ago, how if people say something enough, it's taken as true. And I used the example of, and I saw this on Twitter, a guy had mentioned the Olive Garden paradox, which is basically, we all believe the Olive Garden is the worst restaurant on the planet. Yet, if you drive past an Olive Garden at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, there's a line to get in. So we are in this, especially, us in the media and in the world of Twitter and online, it's a bubble. But if you go into that bubble, you think, oh my God, the Olive Garden is like, you probably die if you eat there. Yet it's wildly popular and people line up to go inside. But we've said it enough, whether comedians use it as a punchline or it's a late night talk show, Olive Garden's horrible, so it must be horrible. Now, I'm not saying the Olive Garden is fine dining, but the idea of it being truthful that it's a horrible restaurant is just, to borrow your word, bullshit, right?
Yes. I don't know if you ever think of it this way, but I don't know if I would have ever become the person I am today had I grown up with all of the digital sites that exist, with Insta, with Facebook, with everything that's out there. I think everyday comparisons of what somebody else says they're doing or who they are versus the truth about what that person is, from visual, the filters that are used, to the internal, the beliefs that they have. It's all kind of murky to me. So I think our culture right now, unfortunately, supports not whole truths. And almost everything that people do these days, there's this filter that, what does he really look like on the other side of the screen? Or what do they mean by that word? So for me, it's trying to strip away that and get down to the basics of how do we teach people to navigate a much more complicated world that existed, that exists right now, that existed years ago when I started. And I thought it was hard when I started. Now, with all the competition and everything that's going on, people need some real advice how to do it, what's good, what's bad, how to also embrace failure, losing something, and most important, an attitude of being optimistic about what they're doing every day, how to take advantage of it, how to turn bad situations into positive situations, because it's attitude, it's all up here.
Yeah, and you're referring to the comparison trap. And, if you read Marcus Aurelius's book, Meditations, he talked about comparisons in 100 AD. So it's, we've been doing it a long time, except like you mentioned, because of social media, it just cranked up to 11, as they say in Spinal Tap. So it's that much harder for the next generation of people, because the comparison trap it's hard to avoid. Unless you're not online, it's really hard to not compare yourself. So it is really about embracing that mindset. And I want to talk about, in terms of these lies that you write about in the book, how do we break through them? So we know, like you mentioned, we know it's bullshit, but how do you embrace a mindset of just for lack of a better word, steamrolling through the lies and cutting through? Because I think Scorsese said it, there's something about cliches because there is some truth to them. So there are some truth to some of these lies. So how do you navigate that fine line?
Most of the cliches that I talk about or that exist actually came from something positive in its original state. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah, that, in a lot of ways that's true. But you look historically from horses to Ford, and how cars came to be. If you ask people years ago, they would just say, I want faster horses. But so the cliches kind of grew out of something they believe to be positive. Don't sweat the small stuff, meaning, oh, there are too many big things that are really important, so don't, ignore that stuff. And to me, when you transfer that into a work setting, the small stuff is the big stuff. If you screw up that small stuff, you're never, ever going to get to the big stuff. So the bigger question you ask is, how do you navigate your way through some of the BS that's in that world? It's basically being pretty much true to yourself and observing. Again, it goes back to reading a room, and that's a broad statement for really assessing any situation you're in. Who is the person you're talking to? What are their needs? How do I listen and really hear what that person wants or what they're thinking or what they're trying to get from me? And responding as positively as you can to it, asking the right questions, understanding where they're coming from with the hope that it's positively motivated, even if their words aren't the right words. And if it's not, rather than attacking, it's just sitting back, thinking about, okay, this is not going to work. Who do I need to talk to? What do I have to do to kind of change this narrative that's going on? Because something isn't happening here. So much has to do with basic observation and seeing and really seeing and really listening to what's going on around you. And that's a skill I think so many people just don't have right now. Either they don't observe, they're too self-centered and too worried about what they're going to do or what they're going to say next to listen to what's really coming out of someone's mouth. And sometimes too in a hurry to get where they need to go, rather than to sit back, think about it, analyze what's going on, and then figuring out the best way to get yes or get where they want to go.
I love that. And, I'm a big proponent of self-awareness. And, as younger people, I'm sure and I could admit I was terrible at it, but I feel like I'm more attuned to it as an adult. The book I wrote a couple of years ago was a big part of it was to be a good listener, to have great conversations with folks. You have to have this self-awareness piece that you have to develop over time. Not everyone is born with it, especially like I said, we're always all stuck in our own head. And like you mentioned, the technology piece is going to be a huge factor in deteriorating self-awareness for folks, because that vibe, the reading the room, it's almost impossible these days. I mean, can you imagine trying to read a room when it's a Zoom room? It's impossible. You can't do that. So it's these interpersonal connections that we have and taking advantage of them.
I agree with you. And one of the pieces of advice in the book is people say, should I work remotely? I had the possibility to work remotely. What do you think? My advice is you can't be in the room if you're not in the room. But I also disagree a little bit. I do believe you can read people on a Zoom call. I think too many people are listening with one ear and on their iPhone or taking notes for something else, when for me, I kind of want to look at all my little gallery squares and see who's listening, who's not listening, who's watching, who all of a sudden jerks their head up because a piece of information just came out, which is useful. You can even read a Zoom room if you're taught the way to do it. But I'm a big believer that it's better to actually be in the room if you ever want to be in the room.
Can we start to wind things down by talking about the current state of being a woman in the media landscape? Like I mentioned, my wife was the only woman in a room of a bunch of guys. And I'm pretty sure it's safe to assume that that's how your career kind of started. What's the room look like now? Is it more diverse? Is there different ages, different genders, different races? What's it looking like now?
I think there have been some great signs in terms of progress when it comes to women. NBCU has great stats and all that. I'm very proud of them and the fact that there are more women in senior positions. But for me, what's really important is bringing up women, bringing them up right so they know how to navigate that workplace. And for women, what years ago used to exist, there were so few seats at that table. Women were negatively competitive because they wanted that seat. They knew that in a room of 14, if there's one, maybe two women, that's going to be a lot. So they weren't naturally supportive and willing to really help other women, whether they were peers or others coming up. What I've seen in market change, it's something I've done my entire career, is I love hiring women. I love bringing up women, and I love having many women around the table with me. I love the collaboration that women, because of our, what I call the excess factor, it comes more naturally. And I think if we can get more people, more women to stop negatively competing, bring one another up, support one another, help grow them, you're going to see even more of a market change in the next decade or two. And that's my hope and my goal. When I worked back in Boston at Good Day, I had an all-woman team, all producers, associate producers, and a female director. I still don't know many women directors in the television business. And Donnie is still directing at a crazy age in Boston at WCBB. It's amazing. I love it. And we have stayed friends since 1984, 85. There are 5 of us, which are still close friends from those days, kind of growing up in local television, local broadcasting. And so the goal, more women in the C-suite. But the way more women are going to get into the C-suite, if more women support and grow them and mentor them. And not mentor them by just being supportive. Mentor them by being challenging, pushing, setting a bar high for them to meet. Kind of being truth tellers. And that's the other thing I'm really big on. Just people supporting other people is not going to help. People being honest with other people in a healthy, positive way, that's going to change how women succeed.
That's so cool. And lastly, you know, just speaking to you for 30 minutes, I could tell you're a very optimistic person. You have a very positive outlook on life. Don't mean to psychoanalyze you. I won't be sending you a bill for this. But how does this positivity and optimism stay with you after surviving so long in this business? Like we talked at the start, it's a tough business, especially for women many, many years ago. Where does this positivity come from? Because to most people who've had a long run in any kind of business, after a while you just become dead inside because you've been through it, you've seen it all, but you don't seem like you're dead at all inside it at the least bit. You feel like you're very positive and have so much to give in this world and the industry.
I'm basically a blue skies kind of gal. When I was very young, my father was my first very supportive mentor. He would always say to me, if you can't do something, it's simply because you're not trying hard enough. And I grew up with that my whole life, that there is no such thing as no. It may mean not now, maybe later, not from this person, but I always believed I could figure out a way to get a yes, whether it's a job, whether it's a reservation at a restaurant that's overbooked, whether it's a better room that they gave me at a hotel, whether it's a flight that's overbooked. It's just part of my DNA to assume I can somehow make it happen if I do it nicely, kindly, in a way that gets people to want to help me, to want to support me, as opposed to being nasty and just demanding stuff from folks. So my nature is optimistic. I do really believe that if I try hard enough, figure out a way around the rule, do whatever I have to, I can kind of do whatever I want. And because I've employed it in a way where I don't turn off people, but I embrace people, they remain part of my life, for my life, that it's really hard to be negative and unhappy even at this age, because I've had a great life so far and I intend that journey to continue.
Wow, that's so cool. And it's funny because you telling me that I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes and think about the shit you might have seen. Like how when you hear about like people get back from war, man, the shit I've seen. Like I'm sure you've probably seen some stuff that could have brought you down and made those blue skies cloudy, but they didn't. So to me, that's super inspiring.
You do see a lot, and you can choose to dwell on the negative. You can choose to dwell on, excuse my French again, but the a-holes in your world, in the experience, the boss that was nasty, the person who stole a job from you, an opportunity you didn't get. But the healthy way around that, yes, go home, cry the night out, go to the bathroom stall, weep, come back, put yourself together. But it's dwelling on the negative. It's not going to get you anywhere. Figuring out how to turn that negative into something positive, One instance when I didn't get a job, I was told, no less expected to get, but was told I was going to get. And I went to somebody half my age and a guy. I could have quit. And I was really, really annoyed and pissed off, but I knew they still needed me to run USA and Sci-Fi at the time, and I was making good money, but I still would have liked to make a little bit more. I figured out a way to turn that experience into something I wanted. And because they didn't want to lose me, I got an increase in salary. Because they didn't want to lose me, I negotiated with my then boss to have my own little content studio, which cable did not have, broadcast had. And lo and behold, I got more than I ever could have wanted and had an amazing decade with the cable channels and the studio attached to it and was making more money. And the person that was hired got fired in 2 years. I remained standing. So again, turn whatever situation feels bad and is negative, figure out a way to make it positive. And you can always do that. It's the rare time when you can't make something better happen, even if it's just a lesson you learn that you don't repeat.
Awesome. Her name is Bonnie Hammer. She's the author of 15 Lies Women Are Told at Work and the Truth We Need to Succeed. Bonnie, thank you for indulging me, letting me nerd out a little bit with you, talk about your career, talk about television and cable. It was a lot of fun for me. I hope you enjoyed it as well. So thank you very much and good luck with the book.
Thank you very much. Also, a lot of fun talking with you. I love your energy. Keep it up.
I'll do my best, and that will do it for another Forbes Books podcast. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify and hit subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes. You can always connect with me on X, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Joe Pardavila or TikTok at J Pardavila. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.